The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the familiar hum of translation devices as delegates from 47 species gathered for the monthly cultural exhibition. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthan Empire adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus and gazed down at the small human delegation with barely concealed contempt. Humans had been members of the galactic community for only 3 standard cycles, and their presence still irritated many of the older species. Today, we examine the primitive weapons of various pre-space civilizations, announced Council Speaker Thysaara, her serpentine form coiled elegantly around the central podium. The humans have requested to display something they call samurai steel from their feudal period. A wave of amused chittering swept through the chamber. The Korvaxi delegation, known throughout the galaxy for their advanced metallurgy, began their characteristic clicking laughter. Their exoskeletons gleamed under the chamber's artificial starlight, each segment crafted from materials that could withstand the heat of dying stars. "Primitive iron alloys," scoffed Commander Thexval of the Korvaxi. "We mastered molecular manipulation of metals before these mammals discovered fire. What could their crude hammering techniques possibly offer?" Human Ambassador Sarah Chen stood slowly, her expression calm despite the obvious mockery. Beside her sat 11-year-old Akiko Tanaka, the youngest member of any galactic delegation in recorded history. The girl wore a simple blue dress, her long black hair tied back with a ribbon that seemed almost quaint among the high-tech garments of the other species. "Honored delegates," Ambassador Chen began, her voice steady through the translation matrix. "My colleague will demonstrate why our ancestors treasured these blades above all other possessions." More laughter rippled through the assembly. The towering Bruthan representative, whose species had conquered 16 systems through sheer military might, leaned forward with interest. "A child? You sent a child to demonstrate weaponry? How wonderfully human." Akiko stood and bowed deeply, a gesture that seemed to amuse the aliens even more. She approached the display table, where a katana rested in a simple wooden stand. The blade appeared unremarkable compared to the energy weapons and molecular disruptors that filled the galaxy's arsenals. "This sword belonged to my ancestor Tanaka Yoshinao," Akiko said softly, her young voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "He lived 400 Earth years ago and served the Tokugawa shogunate." The Zephyrian delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a force field, pulsed with what might have been amusement. "How quaint. We have weapons that can disintegrate entire moons, and you bring us an ancient cutting tool." Akiko's small hands wrapped around the katana's handle with practiced ease. "May I show you something special about this cutting tool?" The chamber fell silent, partly from curiosity and partly from the novelty of seeing such a young being handle what they considered a dangerous artifact. Even the normally chattering pixel-she birds went quiet, their feathered forms perched along the upper viewing galleries. Without warning, Akiko drew the blade in a single fluid motion. The steel sang as it left its scabbard, a sound that somehow seemed to resonate in frequencies beyond normal hearing. The blade itself appeared to shimmer, catching light in ways that defied the chamber's carefully controlled illumination. "The folding process," Akiko explained, holding the sword at a respectful angle, "involved heating and hammering the steel thousands of times. My ancestors believed that each fold captured part of the smith's soul." Commander Thexaval's antenna twitched with scientific interest despite himself. "Folded metal is an inefficient process. Our quantum forges can create materials with perfect molecular alignment in microseconds." "Perfect molecular alignment," Akiko repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, your technology is impressive, but tell me, Commander, can your quantum forges create something that grows stronger over time? Something that learns from its wielder and becomes more than the sum of its parts?" The Korvaxi's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Metals do not learn, child," They are static materials with fixed properties. Akiko smiled, an expression so genuine and warm that several delegates found themselves leaning forward despite their skepticism. That's what makes human steel different. This blade has been carried by 23 generations of my family. Each wielder added something to its essence. The Vorthan ambassador's breathing apparatus hissed, with what might have been laughter. Superstitious nonsense. Metal cannot retain memories or grow stronger through use. Would you like to test that theory? Akiko asked politely. The challenge hung in the air like a charged particle field. The galactic delegates exchanged glances, their various sensory organs focusing on the small human girl who stood so calmly before them. Dr. Korath of the Scientific Consortium, a being whose species had mapped the quantum structure of reality itself, stepped forward. Very well, young human. Our sensors can measure the molecular composition and stress patterns of any material. Let us examine this special steel of yours. Advanced scanning beams played over the katana from multiple directions. The results appeared on holographic displays throughout the chamber, showing detailed molecular structures and stress patterns that the assembled scientists immediately began analyzing. Curious, Dr. Korath muttered, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the data streams. The carbon content varies in patterns that should not be possible with primitive smelting techniques, and these stress lines, they form geometric patterns that suggest intentional design at the molecular level. Our ancestors called it Tamashi no Hagane, Akiko said quietly. Soul steel. They believed that the repeated folding process, combined with the wielder's spirit, created something beyond ordinary metal. The Bruthan general, Rakthar, whose people had studied warfare for millennia, examined the readouts with professional interest. The density variations create natural flexibility points. This would allow the blade to absorb impact energy without breaking. Crude, but effective engineering. But that's not all, Akiko continued. She raised the sword slightly, and the chamber's lighting seemed to bend around the blade's edge. The true test of samurai steel isn't its molecular structure. It's what happens when it encounters something that seems impossible to cut. Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline breathing apparatus clouded with skeptical vapor. You suggest this primitive blade could cut through advanced materials? Our hull plating is composed of metamaterials that exist partially in subspace. Nothing from your planet could even scratch such surfaces. Would you be willing to provide a sample for testing? Akiko asked, with the same polite tone she might use to request more tea. The Vorthan's contempt was palpable. Certainly. I'll enjoy watching your ancient toy fail against true advanced engineering. He gestured to an aide, who produced a small piece of their ship's hull plating. The material shimmered with an oily iridescence, its surface appearing to shift between dimensions. Akiko accepted the sample with both hands and bowed respectfully. Thank you for this honor. She placed the metamaterial on the testing stand and stepped back, centering herself with deep breaths that seemed almost meditative. The chamber watched in fascination as the young girl's entire demeanor changed. Gone was the polite child. In her place stood someone who moved with the fluid grace of centuries-old tradition. Her feet found perfect balance, her grip on the sword's handle adjusted with minute precision, and her eyes focused with the intensity of a master craftsman. In our tradition, she said softly, cutting is not about force. It's about finding the path of least resistance, the natural way the world wants to divide. The blade rose in a perfect arc, its edge catching light from across the electromagnetic spectrum. For a moment that seemed to stretch beyond time. Every being in the chamber held their breath. Advanced civilizations that had conquered the stars watched a human child prepare to test ancient steel against modern science. The katana descended. The metamaterial, which existed partially in subspace and could withstand the pressure of neutron stars, divided cleanly in two. The cut was so perfect that the pieces seemed to float apart rather than fall, their severed edges mirror-smooth despite the material's complex quantum structure. Silence filled the chamber like the vacuum of space itself. 47 species of advanced beings stared at the impossible sight before them. The piece of hull plating that should have been untouchable lay in two perfect halves, cut by a blade forged with hammers and fire centuries before humanity reached for the stars. Dr. Korath's scanning equipment whirred frantically, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. The quantum resonance patterns. They don't match any known cutting methods. The blade somehow found and exploited microscopic stress points that our instruments couldn't detect. Akiko lowered the sword and bowed to the assembled delegates. My ancestors taught that every material has a natural grain, a way it wants to be shaped. The secret isn't forcing the cut, but listening to what the material tells you. Commander Thexval's mandibles clicked rapidly as he studied the readings. The blade's molecular structure shifted during the cut. The carbon matrix realigned itself to optimize the edge geometry for that specific target. This should be impossible with static materials. Nothing is truly static, Akiko replied, cleaning the blade with a soft cloth. Everything in the universe is connected, constantly exchanging energy and information. Our smiths learned to forge metal that could participate in that exchange, the Zephyrian energy being pulsed with colors that translated as profound confusion. You're suggesting that consciousness can directly affect matter through intention alone? I'm suggesting that human consciousness can work with properly prepared materials to achieve results that pure technology cannot, Akiko corrected gently. The sword doesn't think, but it can respond to the thoughts and intentions of its wielder. Ambassador Zethkar's breathing apparatus was now completely fogged with what the translation matrix identified as bewilderment, mixed with growing unease. This violates established principles of materials science. Does it? Akiko asked, returning the katana to its stand with ceremonial precision. Or does it reveal principles that your science hasn't discovered yet? The chamber erupted in urgent conversations as delegates conferenced with their scientific advisors. The implications of what they had witnessed were staggering. If humans possessed technology that could adapt and respond to consciousness itself, it suggested capabilities that might rival or exceed anything in the galactic arsenal. But as the noise died down, one question hung in the air like cosmic radiation, impossible to ignore and impossible to dismiss. If an 11-year-old human girl could accomplish something that challenged their understanding of reality itself, what else might humanity be capable of? The first session of the cultural exhibition ended with more questions than answers, and for the first time in galactic history, the advanced species found themselves wondering if they had underestimated the newest members of their community. The primitive humans, with their crude steel, had just demonstrated something that sophisticated quantum engineering couldn't replicate, and young Akiko Tanaka, sitting quietly beside Ambassador Chen as the delegates filed out in confused clusters, smiled the patient smile of someone who knew that this was only the beginning. 3 standard days after the demonstration, the Galactic Council's scientific wing buzzed with activity unlike anything seen in recent memory. Research teams from 12 different species had requested emergency sessions to study the recordings of Akiko's blade work. The footage had been analyzed frame by frame, the quantum signatures mapped and remapped, but the results only deepened the mystery. Dr. Korath stood before a holographic display showing the molecular structure of the katana at the moment of cutting. His multifaceted eyes reflected the swirling data patterns as he addressed the emergency scientific committee. Colleagues, what we witnessed defies our current understanding of matter-consciousness interaction. The blade's carbon lattice underwent real-time restructuring that should require temperatures exceeding those found in stellar cores. Commander Thexval's exoskeleton plates clicked nervously as he studied the readouts. Our most advanced materials require quantum field manipulation to achieve similar adaptive properties, yet this human child accomplished the same result using what appears to be focused intention alone. The committee chamber contained representatives from the galaxy's most analytically minded species. The crystalline Veltari, who could process information at near-light speeds, huddled around their quantum computers in obvious frustration. Their calculations kept producing results that violated fundamental laws of physics. "The energy requirements alone should have been prohibitive," muttered Professor Zixandra, her translucent form shimmering with agitation. "To realign molecular bonds without external heat sources, while simultaneously maintaining structural integrity, demands precision that our finest equipment cannot achieve." Dr. Korath manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific sections of the blade. "Note these stress patterns. They form geometric sequences that suggest the metal is processing information in ways we don't understand. Each fold in the steel appears to function as a data storage and processing unit." The implications sent ripples of unease through the assembled scientists. If humans had somehow developed organic quantum computing using simple metallurgy, their technological assessment of Earth's capabilities needed immediate revision. Meanwhile, in the diplomatic quarters, Akiko sat in a modest room that seemed almost Spartan compared to the lavish accommodations provided to other delegates. She was practicing calligraphy, her brush moving in smooth strokes across rice paper when the door chimed softly. "Enter," she called politely, not looking up from her work. Ambassador Chen stepped in, followed by an unexpected visitor. General Rakthar of the Bruthan military filled the doorway with his imposing bulk, his scarred carapace bearing the marks of countless battles across the galaxy. "Akiko-san," Ambassador Chen said, using the honorific that had become her habit when addressing the young girl. "General Rakthar has requested to speak with you about your demonstration." Akiko set down her brush and rose to bow respectfully. "I am honored by the General's visit. Please, would you care for tea?" The Bruthan general, whose species was known for their direct military efficiency, seemed caught off guard by the offer. Tea would be acceptable." As Akiko prepared the tea ceremony with precise, meditative movements, Rakthar found himself studying her with new eyes. His people had conquered 16 systems through superior tactics and weapons technology, yet something about this small human's composure suggested depths he hadn't expected. "Your blade technique," he began as she served the tea in delicate ceramic cups, "it employs principles our military strategists don't recognize." Akiko knelt on a cushion and gestured for her guests to sit. "The way of the sword is not primarily about fighting, General San. It is about understanding the flow of natural forces and learning to work with them rather than against them." Rakthar's scarred mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Our weapons are designed to overcome resistance through superior force. Your method suggests something different." "My ancestor taught that the strongest steel is not the hardest steel," Akiko explained, sipping her tea with careful attention to its temperature and flavor. "The strongest steel is the steel that can bend without breaking, that can adapt to whatever challenge it faces." The general leaned forward, his professional interest clearly engaged. "Our metallurgists have been studying your people's folding techniques. They believe the repeated heating and hammering creates microscopic stress patterns that enhance the metal's response to certain frequencies." Akiko smiled gently. "Your metallurgists are partially correct, but they're looking at the effect rather than the cause. The folding process is important, but it's not what makes the steel special." "Then what does?" Ambassador Chen asked, her diplomatic curiosity aroused. "The intention of the smith," Akiko replied simply. "Each fold is done with purpose, with focus, with the understanding that the metal is becoming something more than it was. The smith doesn't just shape the steel, he teaches it to remember. Rakthar's compound eyes fixed on the young girl with intense scrutiny. You're suggesting that consciousness can be embedded in inanimate matter? I'm suggesting that consciousness can create patterns in matter that persist beyond the moment of creation, Akiko corrected. Your scientists think of metal as static, but our smiths understood that everything is in constant motion, constantly changing. They learned to guide that change. The general set down his teacup with a decisive click. I want to see this process. Can it be demonstrated? Akiko considered the request carefully. The full forging process takes many days and requires special materials. But I can show you how the principle works on a smaller scale. She rose and retrieved a simple iron nail from her travel kit. This is ordinary iron, mass-produced by modern methods. Watch. Holding the nail between her palms, Akiko closed her eyes and began breathing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if the very air was holding its breath. In our tradition, we call this listening to the metal, she said softly. Every piece of iron remembers the star where it was born, the planets where it formed, the hands that shaped it. If you listen carefully, you can hear its history. The nail began to warm in her hands, though she applied no external heat. Ambassador Chen's instruments detected increasing electromagnetic activity centered on the small piece of metal. I'm asking it to remember when it was more than just a simple nail, Akiko continued, when it had the potential to become something greater. The iron began to glow with a faint inner light. General Rakthar's tactical scanners went wild, detecting energy patterns that should have been impossible for such a simple demonstration. The molecular structure is shifting, he reported in amazement. The crystal lattice is becoming more organized, more uniform. But there's no external energy source. Akiko opened her eyes, and the nail had visibly changed. What had been a rough, industrial fastener was now a perfect miniature blade, its surface gleaming with the same otherworldly quality as her katana. This is why our enemies feared samurai steel, she explained, offering the transformed nail for examination. Not because it was the hardest or sharpest, but because it could become whatever the situation required. Rakthar's scanning equipment confirmed what his eyes could see. The nail's molecular structure now matched the patterns they had observed in the katana. Somehow, through intention alone, the young girl had reorganized solid matter at the atomic level. The implications for material science are staggering, Ambassador Chen breathed. If consciousness can directly influence molecular structure, then technology, as we understand it, represents only one path among many, Akiko finished. Your people have mastered the external manipulation of matter through tools and energy. Our ancestors learned the internal manipulation of matter through understanding and intention. General Rakhthar stood abruptly, his massive form casting shadows across the small room. I must report this to the military council immediately. If humans possess these abilities, Akiko interrupted gently, then perhaps it's time for the galaxy to consider new forms of cooperation rather than new forms of conquest. The Bruthan general paused at the door, his scarred carapace gleaming under the artificial lights. You speak of cooperation, yet you demonstrate capabilities that could render our most advanced weapons obsolete. Akiko's smile was as serene as a mountain lake. General San, a sword that can cut through anything is useless if its wielder lacks the wisdom to know when not to use it. That wisdom is the most important part of our tradition. After the general left, Ambassador Chen remained behind, studying the young girl with new appreciation. Akiko, do you understand what you've just revealed? This could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Power balanced by fear is not true power, Akiko replied, returning to her calligraphy. True power comes from understanding one's place in the larger pattern of existence. As she spoke, her brush moved across the paper, creating characters that seemed to capture light and hold it within their strokes. The writing appeared simple, but Ambassador Chen found herself unable to look away from the symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner rhythm. "What are you writing?" she asked. "An old poem," Akiko replied. "It says, 'The mountain does not boast of its height, yet all rivers flow toward the sea. My sensei taught it to me when I first began learning the way of the sword.'" Ambassador Chen watched the graceful movements of the brush, each stroke placed with the same precision Akiko had shown with her blade. "And what does it mean?" "It means that the greatest strength often appears as gentleness, and the wisest action sometimes looks like inaction." Akiko set down her brush and looked up with eyes that seemed far older than her 11 years. "Tomorrow, when I demonstrate the true secret of samurai steel, the galaxy will need to remember this lesson." The ambassador felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you planning to show them?" Akiko's smile was mysterious as starlight. "Something that will make today's demonstration look like a simple parlor trick. The council wanted to understand human potential. Tomorrow, they'll begin to grasp just how little they truly know about what consciousness can achieve when properly focused." Outside the diplomatic quarters, the galaxy's most advanced civilizations continued their frantic analysis of the day's events. None of them suspected that what they had witnessed was merely the foundation for something far more profound. The young girl from Earth was about to teach them that the difference between primitive and advanced technology might be nothing more than a matter of perspective. And in the depths of space, ancient forces that had slumbered since the galaxy's youth began to stir, drawn by the resonance of steel that remembered its stellar birthplace and the consciousness that could sing it back to its original form. The Grand Assembly Hall had never hosted such an unusual gathering. Word of the previous day's demonstration had spread throughout the galactic communication networks, drawing delegates from species that rarely participated in council activities. The crystalline observers of the Eternal Archive floated in their containment fields, beings who normally only emerged to record events of cosmic significance. Ancient species that communicated through quantum entanglement rather than speech had sent their most sensitive interpreters. Akiko stood in the center of the vast chamber, looking impossibly small beneath the dome that displayed real-time images of distant galaxies. Around her, representatives of civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel, planetary engineering, and dimensional manipulation watched with the intense focus usually reserved for the birth of stars. "Honored delegates," Ambassador Chen announced, her voice carrying across the assembly through the translation matrix. "Today my colleague will demonstrate the deepest principles of what our ancestors called the way of the sword." The Vorthan delegation had arrived in full ceremonial armor, their crystalline breathing apparatus polished to mirror brightness. Ambassador Zethkar's earlier contempt had transformed into wary respect, tinged with fear. Overnight, their intelligence services had confirmed that 17 other pieces of primitive human technology displayed similar impossible properties when examined closely. Dr. Korath had positioned every scanning device the consortium possessed around the demonstration area. "Colleagues," he addressed the scientific observers, "yesterday's readings suggested the manipulation of matter through consciousness alone. Today, we may witness phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality itself." Akiko knelt in the traditional seiza position, her katana resting across her thighs. Before her lay 7 objects provided by different species: a fragment of Zephyrian energy-matter hybrid, a piece of temporal stable material from the Chronarch Empire, a sample of living metal from the Symbiont Collective, quantum-locked crystal from the Veltari Archives, metamorphic armor plating from the Bruthan Fleet, psionic resonance stone from the Mindweaver civilization, and a piece of null space material that existed partially outside normal dimensions. Each of these materials represents the pinnacle of your respective technologies, Akiko said softly, her young voice somehow carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Your scientists have told me they are impossible to cut with any known weapon or technique. Commander Thexaval's mandibles clicked nervously. The Bruthan armor plating alone requires antimatter temperatures to damage. The quantum-locked crystal exists in a state of temporal suspension. They cannot be affected by normal matter. Akiko's eyes remained closed as she spoke. Normal matter, yes, but samurai steel is not normal matter, Commander-san. It is matter that has learned to remember its original nature. She began to breathe in a pattern that seemed to resonate with the chamber's acoustics. The artificial atmosphere itself appeared to respond, creating harmonics that registered on instruments designed to detect cosmic background radiation. In the beginning, she said, her voice taking on the cadence of ancient storytelling, all matter was one. In the hearts of the first stars, every element we know was forged from the same primordial energy: iron, carbon, silicon, the exotic materials you've created, all children of the same stellar furnace. The energy readings in the chamber began to shift, the Zephyrian energy being pulsed with colors that translated as profound curiosity, while the temporal monitoring systems detected what could only be described as chronological fluctuations. My ancestors understood this unity, Akiko continued, her hands moving to the katana's grip. They learned that by remembering this connection, steel could recognize its kinship with any other matter, not cutting through it but asking it to remember when they were one. She drew the blade in a motion so fluid it seemed like water flowing upward. The steel sang its familiar note, but this time the sound carried harmonics that resonated at frequencies beyond the range of most species' hearing. Throughout the chamber, sensitive equipment began registering cascading resonance patterns. The first cut, Akiko whispered, approaching the Zephyrian energy matter hybrid. The blade passed through the sample without resistance, as though the exotic matter had simply chosen to separate along the sword's path. The cut edges didn't show the violent disruption typical of energy-matter division. Instead, they displayed the same mirror-smooth finish as yesterday's demonstration. Gasps echoed through the chamber in a dozen different atmospheric compositions. The Zephyrian delegate's energy form flickered through spectrums that indicated shock approaching system overload. But Akiko wasn't finished. She moved to the temporal stable material, her blade raised in perfect form. The second cut! Time itself seemed to hesitate as the katana encountered the chronarch sample. For a moment that lasted both an instant and an eternity, the blade and the temporal material existed in perfect balance. Then the sample divided cleanly, its time-locked structure somehow preserving the integrity of the cut across multiple temporal dimensions. The chronarch observer, a being that existed simultaneously across several time streams, transmitted what could only be interpreted as astonishment. Impossible. That material is locked in temporal suspension. Nothing from this timeline should be able to affect it. Time is also a creation of consciousness, Akiko replied serenely, moving to the living metal sample. Consciousness that remembers when all moments were one moment. The third cut through the symbiont collective's living metal sent ripples of distress through their delegation. Their technology was based on metal that could think, grow, and adapt. Yet the katana severed it as cleanly as if it were ordinary steel, leaving edges that somehow remained alive and aware despite the separation. Each subsequent cut defied the understanding of entire civilizations. The quantum-locked crystal divided along planes that shouldn't exist in normal space. The metamorphic armor plating, which could adapt to any attack within nanoseconds, seemed to forget its defensive programming and separate willingly. The psionic resonance stone, which existed partially in the realm of pure thought, was cut by a blade that momentarily became partially conceptual itself. Finally, Akiko approached the null space material, the sample that existed partially outside normal dimensions. The chamber held its breath in whatever gaseous medium each species required. "The final cut," she said, raising the katana one last time. The blade descended toward matter that technically shouldn't interact with anything in normal space. But as it touched the null space material, something extraordinary happened. The katana's steel began to shimmer and phase, its molecular structure becoming fluid while maintaining its essential form. The cut was perfect, impossible, and beautiful. The null space material divided along dimensional boundaries that the most advanced physics couldn't map, yet the separation was clean and precise. Silence filled the chamber like the vacuum between galaxies. 47 species of advanced beings stared at 7 impossible cuts, each one challenging fundamental principles they had considered immutable laws of nature. Dr. Korath's voice broke the silence, his multifaceted eyes reflecting data streams that painted impossible pictures. The quantum signatures, they're not showing destructive cutting at all. They're showing invitation, as if each material chose to separate. That's exactly what happened, Akiko confirmed, cleaning her blade with the same reverent care she had shown before. The sword doesn't force the cut. It reminds each piece of matter of its original unity with all other matter, and asks if it would like to remember what it was before it became what it is. General Rakhthar stood slowly, his massive frame trembling with implications he was only beginning to grasp. If this technique can be applied to other materials, ships, weapons, defensive systems, could be unmade as easily as they were made, Akiko finished gently. Yes, General San, but that's not the true lesson here. She sheathed the katana with ceremonial precision and bowed to the assembled delegates. The lesson is that separation is an illusion. Your species explore the galaxy, claiming territories and establishing boundaries, but you're all children of the same stellar nurseries. You're all made of the same cosmic dust. Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline breathing apparatus clouded with what the translation matrix identified as existential uncertainty. You're suggesting that our technological advancement is meaningless? I'm suggesting that your technological advancement is only one note in a vast symphony, Akiko replied. Beautiful, but incomplete without harmony with the other instruments. The young girl walked to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the profound silence. Your species have mastered the external manipulation of matter and energy. You can reshape planets, travel between stars, and bend the laws of physics to your will. But you've forgotten the most important law of all. Which is? Asked the Veltari representative, her crystalline form resonating with curiosity. That consciousness is the foundation from which all other laws arise, Akiko said simply. Matter behaves as it does because consciousness dreams it that way. Change the dream, and you change the reality. The implications rippled through the assembly like gravitational waves from colliding black holes. If a human child could demonstrate conscious control over matter at the molecular level, what might her entire species be capable of when they matured? The samurai understood this, Akiko continued, her voice carrying the wisdom of centuries. They knew that the strongest warrior was not the one with the sharpest sword, but the one who understood that there was no real difference between the sword, the warrior, and the enemy. All three were expressions of the same underlying unity. Commander Thexval's exoskeleton plates clicked in rapid patterns that indicated deep thought. If what you demonstrate is possible for humans, why haven't you used these abilities to conquer the galaxy? Akiko's smile was radiant as sunrise over a mountain peak. Because, Commander San, what would be the point of conquering yourself? The chamber erupted in urgent conversations as delegates tried to process the philosophical and practical implications of what they had witnessed. But gradually, a new understanding began to emerge among the gathered beings. The humans hadn't joined the Galactic Council as junior partners seeking protection and guidance. They had arrived as teachers, carrying knowledge that could transform every species' understanding of existence itself. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out in thoughtful clusters, many carried with them the beginning of a new perspective. The universe wasn't a vast battlefield where species competed for resources and territory. It was a classroom where consciousness could learn to recognize its own infinite creative potential. And young Akiko Tanaka, carefully wrapping her ancestral blade in silk, knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had seen what human consciousness could achieve when properly focused and trained. Soon, they would discover what humanity as a whole might accomplish when they truly understood their place in the cosmic story. The age of expansion through conquest was ending. The age of evolution through understanding had just begun, guided by the ancient wisdom of steel that remembered when all things were one, and consciousness that had never forgotten how to dream new worlds into existence. In the depths of space, the ancient forces that had stirred the day before now sang with joy. The younger races were finally beginning to remember the lessons their predecessors had learned eons ago, and the galaxy itself prepared for a transformation more profound than the birth of its first stars.